Welcome back. I've got a review for a direct-to-video title that came out in the mid-'80s, along with just a plethora of direct-to-video horror films. But this one kind of stands above, well, slightly above a lot of those releases, and that is the Forever Evil, which came out in 1987. It was directed by a guy named Roger Evans and written by a guy named Freeman Williams. And Roger Evans made back in the 80s a Super 8 millimeter Jet the Benny, and was able to sell it to a distributor group called United, and then United eventually became VCI. Based on this Super 8 millimeter film that Roger did, he was able to cobble together some money from United VCI and make Forever Evil. But the film, really the backstory of the film is much more interesting than the film itself, which tends to be the case with a lot of these. But just real quick story synopsis: you've got a cabin in the woods situation a la Evil Dead. Basically, you've got a group kind of led by a couple that one of the guys played by Red Mitchell. He and his girlfriend, his pregnant girlfriend, by the way, are going to go to their parents, his parents' kind of country home that they're getting ready to sell and have one big bash before they sell it, along with some friends. And of course, as soon as they get to the cabin in the woods, a lot of supernatural, evil spirit type stuff starts happening, and members of the group get bumped off. When this happens, Red does some research on it and finds out that another girl had a similar occurrence, and he pairs up with her to kind of fight this supernatural spirit, which in its bodied form turns out to be this guy here, which was not a bad little monster in the film. There's a number of the film. First off, the film is painfully slow. It's in fact the director's cut is like 2 hours. The theatrical cut was only 10 minutes less. I think it would have made a 75-minute movie better than what it is, but there was a lot of extrapolation dialogue and a lot of things, a lot of just static dialogue scenes that I think, they could have just done without, quite honestly. But there are some iconic moments in this. One of which is when Holly, the girlfriend, the pregnant girlfriend, basically gives herself a C-section, does a self C-section, and births this devil baby. That's the most iconic scene in the film, I think. And for a low budget direct to video film, it's not bad in a lot of ways. It's and the special effects are not bad. I mean, I appreciate the effort. And then if you're interested in low budget indie filmmaking, particularly that of the 1980s, this was 1987, you could do worse than Forever Evil. Now, for the more interesting part of the story. So this release, there's 2 cuts of the film. You got the theatrical and you've got the extended director's cut. This is well, this is a VCI release. Okay. There's deleted scenes, and then there's commentaries, a commentary track. And the commentary track is really fascinating because you get to hear Roger Evans and Freeman Williams talk about the direction and writing of the film. And Roger Evans makes no bones about it. He doesn't like horror films, and I don't know that prejudice comes through in this film. I think he did a workmanlike job. Was there passion there for the material? I don't know. I mean, it's a low budget indie film. The more interesting story about this is Freeman Williams, who wrote the script. The original script was like 50 minutes of footage of film. So he had to go back and do numerous rewrites, and ended up with a script that was 2.5 hours long if they'd have shot it. So they ended up making a lot of adjustments and alterations to the script. That whole process, uh, Freeman Williams put on a website, the Bad Movie Report, and I'll put a link in the description box below where you can go if you're interested to read the 14 some odd chapters that kind of gives you a really interesting blow by blow description of how the movie was made, pre-production, during the production, post-production. It's a fascinating look at an attempt by some folks to get into the filmmaking business. And these two guys, I think what happened was back in the early 80s, obviously with the success of Raimi's Evil Dead and Friday the 13th, you had a lot of people coming out of the woodwork that said, well, I saw those movies. I think I can do better, or at least as well as those guys. And I think Roger Evans and Freeman Williams were no different. I mean, that's what really prompted them to get into this and make Forever Evil, was the inspiration of Evil Dead. And you can see that inspiration. I'm not saying they're ripping off Evil Dead, but certainly that inspiration is there. But it's its own film. I think it stands on its own merits, and there are some pretty decent scenes. They're just interspersed within a 2 hour time frame was just a bit much to ask, quite honestly. But it's an engaging, interesting commentary track, and I do recommend the release. I think it's something that if you're interested in low budget indie filmmaking, this is a film you ought to pick up. You ought to listen to the commentary track and then read a few chapters of the Freeman Williams saga about this movie. So it comes with two DVDs. There's the director's cut, and then the theatrical. So yeah, that's Forever Evil. I give it a 6 out of 10. I mean, you could do worse from a direct-to-video standpoint, but it does give you a little taste of what it was like to be an independent movie guy back in the 80s. I thought it was interesting, so I recommend it. All right, appreciate you watching. Thanks.